need to deconstruct. And yet every society did it wrong. We all did it wrong. Capitalism, it's wonderful that you can get a safety pin at 4 a.m. within a half mile of anywhere in the United States. And I'm sure the Russians wish they had it so good. But is that the be-all and the end-all of cultural values? That you can walk the fluorescent lit aisles of Kmart and congratulate yourself that whether it be gas can, sanitary napkin, or whatever, it's there waiting for you. I don't think so. I think that we have built in the termination of our world just as surely as the Marxist world built in a tripwire into its social mechanism. It's just that we're going to have to pay the piper more downstream in a while. What's happening globally is that the contradictions of all of these social systems are rising into evidence. I mean, we have lethal ideas. The world is haunted by a number of lethal ideas. The hot lethal idea at the moment is crack, and we're exhorted it's terrible. 11-year-old children are apparently the sole source of support for a $14 billion industry. Civilization is going over the edge. As a former member of the High Church of Rome, I feel it's incumbent upon me to point out to you that the policies of the papacy on population are shoving more people into early death, disease, and degradation than any drug scourge you could imagine. And I haven't heard any call for the extradition of the Pope. So, it's just a matter of cultural style and blindness, where you think the suffering is coming from and who you think is responsible for it. If we descend into the dominator metaphor and play its game, we're probably going to be snookered because they've had a long, long time to figure out all the angles. What I find myself more and more leaning to is sharing the meme of the irrelevance of conservative institutions. History is not a process for which you ask permission. History is just something you make, and then other people pick up the pieces. Henry David Thoreau understood this very well when he wrote his famous treatise on civil disobedience. The growth of culture is something that comes out of the animal body. Rousseau called it the general will. Man proposes and God disposes. But in the realm of civil polity, the people dispose, and government is allowed to propose. But that's all. And now what we are involved in, really, is a debate about human nature. Who are we? What are we? The French cartoonist Mobius put it very well in his book where he asked the question, is man good? This is what we're going to find out. And my feeling is that it isn't decided yet. That it is, H.G. Wells called history a race between education and disaster. Well, they're in the home stretch, neck and neck. It's clearly going to be a photo finish. But there is a responsibility on everyone who sees this to communicate it to other people and to act upon it. I think we forget, all of us, what a tiny percentage of the human race we represent, and how many people are just so lost in propaganda and unexamined cultural values. And, people are worrying about how to get the next $600 end table, or, just trivia. And yet the world rolls inexorably toward a confrontation with transformation or ruin. How can the word be spread without just spreading panic? Well, I think it has to do with empowering this notion of a planetary process, a Gaian birth that we are midwife to, which is a functional role, but not a central role. The process is going to happen. Our job is to ease it, to reassure the mother, reassure the spectators, help the child, bring everything to a calm fruition. But we are ultimately witnesses to the process, not its cause. And in the ethics of the position of witness, we can find, I think, a place to stand that will allow us to feel responsible and exercise moral responsibility without feeling paralyzed by the magnitude of the task. Things are getting better and better in every way. I mean, it's a complex process because the world lives through death. I mean, you can see, if you're an embryologist, that when the little paddle of the fish human in the fetus begins to change into a hand, the way in which the fetus develops is through the sculpting hand of death. Death carves away tissue. Cells are shed into the amniotic fluid. They die. And out of this process of inward dying, the undifferentiated fish-like fetus turns into a miniature anticipation of a human being. There is something totally consuming about the way nature builds life out of death. The Amazon is a wonderful example of this, because the Amazon is the most living place you have ever seen, and at any given moment all organic material is bound in living systems, 95% bound in living systems. You don't find forest floor detritus and rotting logs and stuff like that in the Amazon. If a leaf falls, within minutes or hours at most, it has been found by leafcutter ants or some other pathogen that begins to return it to the cycle of life. This kind of economy, this kind of stability through utilization of flow, is the design principle that we have ignored for several thousand years, and that offers a way out. Dynamic equilibrium, an abandonment of the possibility of closure. Closure is a neurotic and infantile demand to make upon reality, other people, language. You just have to live in this state of dynamic disequilibrium, which, if sustained long enough and in sufficient taste, becomes a life well lived. The shaman knows this because they plunge into this realm where everything is transient flow and interlocking field, where the materiality of the ordinary reality is overcome by the quantum mechanical, wave mechanical, maternal face behind appearances. And again, it must be Moby Dick morning. Ahab says, if you would strike through the mask. It is behind the mask. Reality is a mask, because reality enforces this idea of permanence, but not if carefully examined. Women know this, because women see birth, bury the dead, raise the children. They exist in this domain of flow. But the male dominant ego because it is transient and has great anxiety about that, refuses this primary intuition. And when I say that the original partnership society was stabilized through boundary dissolution, that's what I mean. The dissolution of the assumption of permanence. Me, my existence, my women, my food, my children, my weapons, my land, my this, my that, all of that is seen as a fiction. That's why primitive people are so amused by us and our concerns and our clutching, because they know easy come, easy go. And if we could learn this one thing, this is what the plants are trying to teach, I think, that the border between life and death, between being and not being, between me being me and me being you, is so trivial and so arbitrary that it can only be seen as the outer iridescence on the real reality within. This is the secret of a happy life, I think. I mean, I certainly don't claim to achieve it. I am fraught with the agenbite of inwit and the torments of the 42-year-old Irish male, California, heavily mortgaged soul. But I saw it. I saw what it was. And what it is it's a coming to terms with impermanence. And that gives you authenticity that nothing can take away. And courage and presence in the moment and humor and survivability. And if you hold instead to the inviolate pearl of that which cannot be destroyed, everything becomes your enemy. Time becomes your enemy. Space becomes your enemy. And you are doomed to that Ahab fate because, hey, it's bigger than any of us. You can't push the river. Well, that's just by way of summation, trying to say, what is at the pith essence of shamanism, aside from the colorful cultural forms, the dances, the feats of curing and legerdemain. Essentially it all rides, I think, on this vision that all things are impermanent, nothing lasts, all the things are in the process of coming to be and passing away unto the last syllable of recorded time. Well, that was that. Nicole, do you want to try your own summation? Or this afternoon I see basically as an opportunity for people to get their final questions answered. So if you want to make any kind of statement this morning, that would be fine.
Well, I had planned, I rather wanted to, but it doesn't follow.
It doesn't matter.
To discuss some of the medicinal plants that are available in the jungle, that are disappearing as we cut and slash and burn, and that can do so much if only people will go after them and bring them in, test them, and discover how best to use them.
Well, I think you should do that. I think it's good to go from the general to the specific.
Me too.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I've mentioned several of them, but I've had some peculiar experiences myself because, in the first place, it's very difficult when you have only anecdotal reports or information on plants. You don't know quite what to believe. People exaggerate, and people get a little bit imaginative because it makes themselves more important. And then, too, I'm peculiarly subject to that because I haven't gone after things that have been medically tested, scientifically investigated. I've gone after what isn't known. because, well, the others there, let the technicians take over, but the other stuff, the stuff I've been after, is still in the minds and customs of people who are rapidly disappearing, and who are losing that knowledge, and the knowledge that's kept them alive and remarkably healthy through we don't know how many millennia. So I thought, that's what I want. Now, to find out how much of it is highly elaborated report is about one of the two hardest things are to check diagnosis, which you just about can't do, and to check the truth of the reports of cures. Because we know, of course, that everything from aspirin to cocaine came originally from plants. But how many of them are just analogues of what we have? How many of the things that I learn about are merely analogues of things we already have, more conveniently available from pharmaceutical outfits? And how many do not do the things they are supposed to claim to do? And how many are real? And they're there for us, and we need them badly, and can do things that we can't do without, well, surgery, like the burn remedies, that even with a great deal of plastic surgery can't really be equaled in their efficiency. So the first thing I've done always is if it's in a tribe, that's easier, because you can ask different people different questions that are really the same question but asked in different ways. About, did he have white stuff on it? You got it. Of course you say it was infected. You haven't the remotest idea what you're talking about. But did it have a lot of white goo? I'm still on the subject of burns. A lot like the sap of the capinuri on it. Well, that's pretty apt to be pus, and it's pretty apt to be, and pus means infection. You go about it that way. It's a very long and tiresome process. And then you get it from one person, then you have to get it from another, and then another, and another. And some of them will say, well, it wasn't much, and someone will say. So you do the best you can, and set it aside as something that must be investigated. Like, I've been particularly interested in burns because it seems to me such a horrible thing to be terribly disfigured. And I noticed that you almost never see anything like that in the jungle, and yet they have a lot of fire problems. I mean, in the first place, they clear their land by slash and burning, and somebody's kid quite frequently falling into something that's on fire, or the fire in many areas are made, a stove is mud held together by 4 logs, and the fire is built on that, and the fire turns, it's very clayey soil almost everywhere in the Amazon, and that turns to adobe, and it makes a good hard surface to build a fire on. Well, I was going up the Napo with Norman Farnsworth, who is our leading pharmacognosist, and a bunch of other scientists I was taking up to a Witoto outfit, friends of mine, because they wanted a jungle expedition. And we stopped to pick up a friend of mine who is one of the most knowledgeable people I know in the area of medicinal plants, and he's a Peruvian gentleman who married, well, he had a wife in Lima, but he sort of went jungle, had a charming wife in the jungle, and we got there when their 6-month-old baby had just the day before, crawled into the fire, the stove on the earthen floor of the place they were living. And the child's arms, the ventral surface, from wrist to elbow, both arms, was completely without skin. It was raw red, meat. And it's quite a pinkish red. And the two doctors, the two MDs who were with us immediately said, "Oh, we'll take care of that." And he said, "No, you don't." They said, "Well, we'll do something to stop the pain. Let's at least put some local anesthetics on it." He said, "Does the baby look as if it were in pain?" And the baby was, at that moment, in the arms, had been picked up by one of the scientists, a pharmacologist, who had a bright red beard. And the baby was laughing himself, laughing and grabbing the beard with both hands. And they said, "Well, no, maybe it doesn't hurt him." And so my friend, Ojai, his name was, said, he would, yes, he'd come along with us. He'd just put a dressing on the baby first, and his wife would keep the dressings going while he was gone. And he'd got a good old piece of yucca. You know, that is the staple food. It is mania, it is cassava, it has all sorts of names, but it's a staple food, starch of the jungle, the entire Amazon region. You find it everywhere from Colombia through Paraguay down to Argentina, everywhere. And because it's a very suitable jungle crop, it, from the time it's planted, you have a harvest in 6 months. And it's ideal climate and soil for it. Well, he took a piece of that, he peeled it, and inside there is inside the brown peeling, it's a tuber, like potato, there is a sort of slimy, the inner skin, you might call it. It's a bast of phlegm. But, so he took that and put the inner part is gelatinous. He put that on the baby's arms and bandaged it with good, clean, white bandages. And we went on up the river. We were gone 8 days exactly. When we came back, we dropped Ojai off at his house. We went in to see him. And the baby had grown perfect skin. There was one area, I measured it, 1 by 2 centimeters, where the skin had not yet completely grown back. The rest of it was perfect. You could not see at all where the burn had been. It was new, it was clean, it was perfect. No change in texture or color, no borders, no puckering, no anything. Now that is the most available of all possible medicines. Of course, you've got to be careful not to get, I think it would be a bad idea to use the one that's full of cyanide. Strangely enough, some yucca has to be cooked to get rid of the cyanide in it, which is an integral part of it, and then that's the yucca brava, and it's the same species. I've never figured this out. I'm not a botanist. They claim they can figure out why, but it's well known which ones have the poisonous principle and which ones are totally without it. And I would want to be very sure I used the one without, I think. So that is one of 2 plants that I know that does exactly that same thing. Of course, this was a very young baby, a 6-month-old, very healthy baby. But I assume, I haven't seen another case, that the method doesn't seem to be known, even to the tribes, in any of the tribes I'm familiar with. Now that sort of thing could be investigated cheaply. Did you want to say something, Doctor? That could be investigated so cheaply, so easily. Why doesn't somebody?
Got me. I'm ready to go.
How is that spelled?
YUCA. It is the staple food of the cities and the jungle, everywhere except the mountains. It does not grow in cold climates.
I'm sure you could get it in the...
You can buy it in the Puerto Rican
LA,
stores.
Yes.
Yeah. You can buy it in all the stores. But you must get a very young tuber. I was told by my friend, Godoy. It has to be quite a young one. But it's available anywhere. Just make sure you don't get the one. I don't think... Doctor, yeah?
Isn't it the case that sometimes these kind of remedies lose their efficacy when you take them out of the social, cultural, and psychological environment or milieu that they were used in?
No, I haven't found that. Because I've used several I did not believe on myself. Because there wasn't anything else. But you remember my knees?
Yeah, I do remember.
When the motorcycle hit me in Nikita, Terence and Dennis were there at the time. And I got out of it very well. And the thing, except that all the scabs healed up, but my knees never went back to normal size. They stayed swollen, and they got worse and worse. And of course they hurt, but you can ignore things. I have a high pain threshold, and kept going until the left knee began to fold up every now and then. I'd go lurching along like an old drunk, and that was embarrassing. So I went over to see some friends near Pucallpa, had an American doctor with him. And he said this, I can't handle this. You've got some bad tendon damage in there. It needs surgery. And I'm not a surgeon. You'll have to go to Lima. Well, I was not trusting any Peruvian surgeons at that particular time. I know one who's very fine, but he's a neurosurgeon. And the state of medicine in that country is not the highest. And anyway, knees are very tricky. So I thought, well, why not try some of these kooky things that my Montaraces, my jungle men, the people who get plants for me, have suggested, because they kept saying, put kapinuri on it, put kapinuri. So I did, and that's very sticky sap of tree. And the tree is Clivisia nitida. It's a rubiaceae. And I put it on, and you're not supposed to get it wet. You're supposed to let it dry. Well, I don't know how you do that to your knees and still take a shower a couple of times a day, as you must do in that climate. And so I just put it on fresh each time, and pretty soon the pain stopped very quickly. I'd put it on, put a folded gauze over it with adhesive tape, and that was all. And they healed up perfectly, and they're still fine, and I have no problem, no pain, no swelling, no whatever. And it doesn't make sense. But I'm very glad it works. And then that to me is fairly good proof that it works. I was preparing to go to the States for surgery because I was quite certain there was no use in doing this, but try it. And so I've had several things that work like that. There is, for example, a thing that dissolves kidney stones. I haven't had kidney stones, but kidney stones and gallstones. Though they're not identical chemically, it works perfectly for both of them. And my doctor in Iquitos, when I was first there, I had a doctor who was born in Iquitos, was a very good doctor, and he'd been educated in Argentina, I believe it was. And I had a hot gallbladder. I went to him, and when he saw the x-rays, he said, "Oh, gee, it's a shame. It's a pity you haven't got gallstones. If you had gallstones, we could just get rid of them like that. with this plant, chanca piedra they call it, which means, incidentally, chanca is Quechua, that's the language of the Inca, for smash, shatter. And piedra, of course, is rock. And many times you'll find the names of things are quite indicative of their use, but the use has been forgotten. For example, amor seco. Seco means dry, and I doubt that there's anyone who doesn't know what amor means. And that's a contraceptive. But it's only widely known by tribes. About 5 tribes I know use it. I know that the Yucca and the Campa, the Yawa and the Campa, and the Shipibo, the Conibo, and the Piro all use it. So, well, anyway, I managed to get actually I healed the gallbladder with the first medicinal plant I'd ever had, which is Boldo, which is investigated, I think it was about 1920 or 30, no, 20, by Johns Hopkins, and was put on the market officially. But it doesn't come from the jungle, it comes from Chile. It grows only in Chile, oddly enough. Makes a perfectly delicious tea, and it's great for gallbladder infections. But it doesn't dissolve stones, and the other really does, because my doctor told me that he had some, in the neighborhood of 100, I think it was 93 cases, that he had found it utterly successful in curing. And also, a man came to visit me from Germany. In Germany, they have a far more generous attitude toward medicinal plants. There is great interest that Germans are not known for being bad scientists. They're pretty good at their stuff, especially in pharmacology. But they allow the sale of medicinal plants and prescription of them very freely. And this man had a store for plant medicines, and he'd come to Peru to get another shipment of chanca piedra. He told me that he had it for sale for 1 year. He'd used up all he had, and that he had asked the people who came to and bought it to give him reports on progress and on the final result. And he had 94% reports of perfect cures, and the other 6 were people who never came back to tell him. Now that is a plant that could be grown very easily in the United States. I understand that laser actually takes care of those things very well, but not at the present time. It's still very expensive. This stuff is a weed that grows everywhere very easily, you know it. And just grow it in any sunny, warm place. California would be perfect.
Where would you find seedlings for that? Could you buy those Southern California?
Well, you can't buy it now, but these things, that's the point I'm making, these things must be brought in. They really need to be brought in. And incidentally, the capinuri does the same thing as insira, you know, the tooth one?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that I first learned about from a policeman, a jungle policeman. The police of Peru used to be excellent. Times have changed a bit, I'm afraid, but the jungle police was composed of men who had grown up in that environment, who knew their way around, knew what to do, knew how to track, knew all that. And what's more, they usually took an Indian with them to check their tracking, because nobody can do it like the Indians. And they were going after an escaped murderer when he developed a frightful toothache. And he had a camper tracker with him. And the camper said, "Oh, that's all right, I'll fix it." And he went off and came back about 10 minutes later with a leaf on which he had a little bit of very sticky, gooey, yellow-white substance, sap of a tree. And he said, now, and in his hand he had a piece of kapok, which grows in the jungle. And he said, you take a little piece of kapok, cotton is what, because they have no cotton there, didn't have any cotton there. Cotton does grow wild in Peru, but not there. And he dipped it in. He said, now be very careful to put this in the cavity, and don't let it touch another tooth. Because he said it will take the tooth out. And it will not, but if it hits a tooth next to it, but healthy one, it'll take that out too. And so he put it in, and he said the pain stopped immediately. He said it just felt very, very cold. And during the next 30 days, the tooth gradually broke up and came out in little bits. He had no infection, no bleeding, no pain. But the tooth was gone. I had thought originally that this meant the roots went too. They don't, because a dentist from Atlanta, Dr. Hodges, I've forgotten his first name, Ben Hodges, who's a really very good dentist there, came down and he was interested in this, and he did a trip up the rivers examining people who had removed, because lots of the people, the mestizos and Indians know this, and lots of people had teeth out that way. And he examined many that had been done years before. There was never an infection. He couldn't figure out why, because the root's still there. But he found no trouble at all. Now that is a very handy way to get rid of a tooth. I'd much prefer it to a root canal. I tried it. It didn't work. But we had kept the stuff in the refrigerator for a week first. It apparently has to be used fresh. And I should imagine the only way to get it up for testing in the States would be by freezing, flash freezing. That ought, I should think, to bring it up without too much change. Those are two of the more generally popular things, but there are others.
What was the name of that, the sap from the production?
It is Chlorophylla tinctoria, Chlorophporia, Tinctoria, and it is, I think, a euphorbiaceae. Yeah, I'm fairly sure it is. But you can always find the family if you've got the genus. And then another of the things that urgently needs development now is the treatment for hepatitis. That Dr. Walter Lewis and his wife, Dr. Memory Elvin Lewis, who is a very strong feminist and must be mentioned in all his work, have found that the roots, they have confirmed what is generally known in some populations there, that the roots of certain palm trees, there are two that we know about for sure, will they make an infusion of them, make a tea of it. Actually, they boil them a little while. That's a decoction, not an infusion. And drink the broth. And that will very nicely do away with hepatitis. And Dr. Lewis found it very efficient for hepatitis B as well as the more ordinary and easily treated types. Now that is the root of Euterpe edulis, which is a palm tree, and that is, they have found that the Ojai Indians who were visited by Dr. Lewis were using and getting the same results with, because there's a lot of hepatitis. Another palm tree, it's an Eriartia that's called Ponacascia. And he suspects that most of the palms in that area, at least, the species that grow there, the genuses that grow there, genera that grow there, will do the same thing. That hasn't been tested. But he has found them, he's a very good phytochemist, and he's found them chemically very similar. Now there's no reason why those things can't be broken down chemically and tested. But because things like palm roots, Chancapiedra, the one for gallstones, is very effective dried, and so are the palm roots. Those are sold in the market in Lima. They're very popular there because they've got to be quite well known. Then let's see, what other diseases? For eyes, I was going up Rio Tigre on my way far in, and a man, a settler, standing on the bank, jumped up and down, kept waving and waving, and we pulled over to see what was the matter. And when we got close, I have never seen a more hideous pair of eyes. One of them was dripping pus and blood. The other was just swollen and had some pus in it. It wasn't running down his face. And they were in very bad shape. He had been clearing land. And he got some sawgrass, whipped across his eyes, cutting the corneas, which got very badly infected. Jungle's a great place for infections. Well, I offered him immediate. I had brought both penicillin and tetracycline ointments, and also even old, faithful yellow oxide of mercury in the last, if you couldn't get anything else. And he'd had all of those. He got them from a military base that was just up the river, and from a trader who came along who had the yellow oxide of mercury. At the military base he got the antibiotics. Well, the antibiotics had rather helped the eye that looked not quite so bad. The other one, nothing had helped. And so I didn't know what to do, and my boatman said, "But look, amigo, you're standing on the remedy." And he was standing on it's a grass, and grows about so high. And he said, "You take this, and you pull it apart at the node, and then you run your fingernail down, and out will come one crystalline drop of sap. The juice of that grass. You put 2 drops of that in each eye every morning and every night, and we'll find you cured when we get back." And so the man thanked him, and he said he would do it, and I never heard of that. And so, sure enough, when we came back 2 weeks later, it was exactly 2 weeks, too, I know because I had to pay the boatman by the day, he was jumping up and down and waving, and he was the happiest guy you ever saw. He said, "My eye, look. Well, one eye looked, I have seen more bloodshot eyes on people with a bad hangover. And the other one was still a little inflamed, the one that had been so very bad. But there was no pus, no blood. It was obviously, the treatment was a success. And the infection was gone, and the healing was progressing rapidly. And well on its way. On the right eye was, no, actually it was the left, I was going there, was perfect. Oh, not quite perfect, but I mean, there was, except for being a bloodshot. And the other one, the sweat and yucca and everything grew there, gave us a very unhappy chicken, which went all the way back to Iquitos with us. And, but you know, a chicken's a valuable gift in there, because chickens are not native. So, when we got going, I said, you told me you didn't know anything about plant medicines. How come? He said, well, I didn't know it would cure that. But I thought it would, because it cured me of carnosidad, and if it'll cure carnosidad, it'll cure anything. And carnosidad is what they call pterygium, which is very common in tropical countries. It is actually, technically, I'm told, it's a benign tumor that begins at the tear duct and gradually spreads. Makes a layer about 1 millimeter thick, and until it covers the whole eye and you're blind. It is, people who can afford it can have it removed by surgery, which is expensive, and in Peru very frequently means the loss of an eye. But if you don't have radiation afterwards, it'll be back in a couple of years, and you have to go through it all again. And so my boatman, whose name is Natividad, told me that he had had pterygium, he'd had carnosidad so badly that he was beginning not to be able to see. And he went to he was living in Brazil, and an old woman there told him to use this treatment. He said it took him 2 months. But look at him now. Well, look at him now. He didn't have a trace of anything wrong with his eyes. It had cleared it and cured it. Well, that, I think, might, in many cases, do away with the need for corneal transplants, if it's the right kind of injury. What do you think, Doctor?
I think if you found a cure for pterygia, a permanent cure for pterygia, you really...
Oh, I know 2 or 3.
...would make you wealthy and noted throughout the...
Well, I know 2 or 3. The Indians use them. And there is a cypress, which is a sedge, but it's a scleria. That there is, but those things take a long time. For pterygium, that the treatment must be given every day. It doesn't hurt. In fact, the man on the shore told me that it had felt very cooling when he put it in, very soothing. And that takes 2 months for pterygium. 6 weeks to 2 months. Everyday treatment. But in the case of infection, it seems to work very much more rapidly. Yes. Please interrupt me anytime to ask a question. I like it.
Nicole, I heard a story about you from a reliable source a few years ago that told me that you had gone from village to village and managed to kind of meet the old women in the village who had knowledge of their what's the word for the contraceptive herbology.
Yes.
And that you had found out about different herbs that had very different kinds of effects. Like I remember she was telling me one herb you could take it and a couple of years later it would keep the woman infertile for 2 years.
Yes.
Another one, if they took it would be irreversible for a long time. And I've never heard you talk about it. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about your experience.
Well, there's a number of them. You see, although these people have been using oral contraceptives since time immemorial, nobody knows how many centuries. We got them into circulation in 1960. And, but before, earlier, 1920, when Carstens wrote an article about it, they called him crazy or a liar or something, because They said nothing taken by mouth can cause a woman to become sterile. Well, if time has moved on, and the Indians were right. So there are a number of these cases. I think I told you the other day about the Campo missionary. The missionary with the campus. This was before there were oral contraceptives on the market or any publicity about them, that I'd heard of it at least. And that's a bauhinia. If I remember correctly, it has to be taken, it's best taken immediately after giving birth. That's what I met a woman whose husband was running a very large cattle ranch in the jungle, a very large fundo. They made cattle, they made cattle. They had cattle, they raised pigs, and they raised sugar cane, and they had a distillery for making aguardiente. It was a big outfit with a lot of money behind it. And she and her husband ran it. Well, she told me that when she was very, very young, she got married, I think she was 14, which is not unusual, and she went to live with her husband on his property in Kampa country. Kampas are a great tribe. They're great warriors, great trackers, very lively people, and smart. And she had a child very shortly after marriage, I think 9 months and 2 days or something, and she had a very difficult birth. Of course, she'd never been in jungle before, for one thing. She was reacting rather badly to the climate. And the Indian midwife who attended her said, "You can't have another child for 3 years because you'll die if you do." Doctors, of course. And she said, "But I can't leave my husband. I don't want to leave my husband." She said, "What should you leave your husband? We'll give you some medicine." So they did, and the medicine, that particular medicine, is one that, to my mind, is a magnificent example of freedom for freeing women. It stops menstruation for 3 years, without any evil effects at all. And at the end of those 3 years, you just don't menstruate. It brings about an artificial menopause, but no menopause symptoms. And so then, at the end of the 3 years, she got pregnant almost immediately, and then she had, in rapid succession, I think it was in 10 years, she had 11 children. So now, with a total of around a dozen, she decided that was enough. And she took the same herb again. And she had been taking it every 3 years since, and that she was, at the time I met her, 49, she said she didn't think she was going to have to take it again, because she thought she would probably have menopause. And but she took it every 3 years. The children, every one of the 12, was alive and healthy, and they were grown up by now, and they had their own families, and her daughters and daughter-in-laws controlled their fertility in the same way, had children when they wanted them.
So what is
the plant is a desmodium. Now there are 4 species I know of. There's Desmodium canum is the one I know best. Desmodium is, I can't remember. The canum is the one. Oh yes, ascendens and axillare, and then there's one other. Well, I don't know which of the species. I'm not certain which of the species it is, but because I've since learned that the campa, beside the campa, the jaguars, shipibos, conibos, and cocama all say this is good stuff, and they use it.
You mentioned, maybe it was Friday evening, that there was also a plant or something that could be taken orally for abortion that you tried.
Yes, there is, but that's one of the sedges I had, that we have finally decided the active principle is the active principle is a fungus that grows in the plant, and it's practically impossible to determine unless you are a member of the tribe and have grown that. They've handed it down from generation to generation, a plot of abortifacients, a plot of those which are supposed to enhance fertility, a plot which eases childhood, and believe me, that one's great. Because I had a friend who was a school teacher. I met her in a little village I stopped at, and she was teaching a Shipibo village, and she was my first link with the Shipibo tribe. They're the ones who make those beautiful textiles you showed last night.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to stay with her at the tribe and got to be great chums with all the Indians. I recorded their singing, which is beautiful. And one of the songs I love best, the women's songs are very plaintive and haunting. Very high, pure voices, beautifully flexible, and very true, and very soft. And this one song was particularly moving. It was the kind of thing you kept going through your head. And I find it's very hard to get them interpreted because they're sung in an archaic language. And I finally found somebody who would interpret it. And what they were saying was, let's us gals have a few drinks. Then that's smarter than it sounds. Because at fiestas, I learned, when they sing that song, Pappy can't have a drink. The men have to stop drinking when the women drink. They never drink very much. They're too conscious of their children and taking care of them, and usually they're nursing one or two. And so they, but when things are getting a little rough, very often they will sing this song and they'll have a bit of masato, and the men just have to sit there. Well, she had gone. I went back to visit 2 years later because I had become great chums with them, especially after they discovered braziers. I had done my washing and hung it on the line, and a boat came along. I didn't have my own boat then, and I was. One came along, a pecky that would take. It was a collective would take people aboard. They sort of worked like buses on the river. And I had to hurry to catch it. And I had just got in when some of these beautiful little women came running, yelling, and they were running down, holding up a brazier that I'd left behind. And then they also held up they'd copied it. They had made them all, and the whole community, now all the Shipibos look a lot better. They do, especially after they get to be about 30. And so I had... Yes? Question, Pat?
Yes. Back to the birth control method. Do you know if there are fewer negative side effects?
There don't seem to be any. According to my informers, there are none, zero. I haven't heard of any side effects. I tried very hard to find some. I'm told there are none.
Do they use similar plants?
What?
Rather than hormones? Menopause.
Well, yes, she told me that her sister had been having a bad menopause, and she gave her this same thing. And it took her through menopause. Well, I know one that's very good for menopause. It's not a contraceptive, but there is one for any dysmenorrhea. I gave it to the maid, a little girl who had very severe cramps and hemorrhaging. I fixed her up in a day or so, and then the people I was staying with, Lilith was going through menopause and having a bad time with the hot flashes and all that, and hemorrhaging. And I gave her, suggested she try it. I'd planted it in her garden a couple of years before when I was there, and because it has pretty flowers. And she took it.
What is it? Could you spell that?
It's an iris. They call it Yawar Piri Piri. Yawar means blood, and Piri Piri means piri piri. But this is not a sedge. It's an iris. It's an iridaceae. And it is, what is it? I can't think of the genus just at the moment. I'll think of it in about 5 minutes. Drop the penny and I get the answer.
Do they use the bulb or?
Yes, you take the bulb and you can just grind it up in water raw, but more often you boil it a little while. And that does the trick. It seems to regulate menstruation, whether it's menopause or not.
And they drink it just one time?
A couple of times, maybe for 2 days. It doesn't seem to be toxic in any way. There haven't been any tests done on it. But I've never heard of anyone's having any bad effects.
Terence, have you brought any of these plants over that she's
I think that the Chanca Piedra, is it?
Oh, yes, that.
I think we have that.
Yeah, I think you can get that.
And what did you put on your knee?
Capinuri.
Capinuri, we have
Claricia
that.
nitida.
And I would have to have the full printout in front of me, but these are precisely the same plants that we're involved in. The piri piris, Nicole has mentioned that there are contraceptive ones, abortifacients,
you can't tell which are which.
There's also a hallucinogen.
Oh, yes.
And Chicoro piri piri. And I've made great effort to get that one, but not wanting to induce an abortion. Now that I have it, I'm not sure what to do with
well,
it.
It's a different, I think it's a...
I
don't think it's corymbosis.
Well, I don't know. They look...
I'll check it. I have it in my files.
I have 3 species of piri piri, and they basically, the only way in which they're different is they're little, middle-sized, and big before they stop growing. But otherwise, I can't tell them apart, and they're chemically very complex.
I know.
Yeah. No, but the kinds of plants
I
Nicole
gave up
is
on
talking
those
about,
because of this.
Because of
the fact that is apparently not there's no change, no difference in the genus or the species, and it's not a variety. It's some external influence, such as
a fungus. Well, so conceivably,
because they are different chemically.
Someone could do a project where you grew out an uninfected strain and then attempted to infect it with these various strains.
You'd have to get the originals from the Shibibos, though. You see, throughout history, you will go to any village, and you will see little round plots, only about that big round, usually in a village, of piri piri. And there'll be for any one of the 22 uses that I know of, and probably some more. Running from broken bones, and I told you about the ones you wash your husband's pants with, so he'll be impotent with another woman. And the ones for hunting, they'll make you a good hunter. You rub them on your blowgun, you'll never miss your shot. That sort of thing. Which I don't really think we have much need for in our civilization.
What is the name of the grass that is used on the eyes?
That's Paspalum conjugatum. Paspalum conjugatum. It's a Gramineae.
This family, the Gramineae, have many, many indoles and growth hormones, and it seems to be a family loaded with stuff.
It's very interesting.
Very interesting.
There is another grass that the Shipibos say has saved more lives. You see, the Shipibos have some rather interesting customs. If a woman is caught with a man who is not her husband in a compromising situation, why, everybody drops everything and there's a big fiesta. And the woman is not punished. But the man has to be severely punished because it's his fault. I am in favor of this civilization. And he is at the fiesta. Everybody gets very drunk, and then the husband has a special knife for this. Every Shipibo man wears one on a string. It's called a rishati, and it's a knife with a little handle that is a peculiar shape, and a curved blade is cut out of an old machete, and it's only about the blade's only about so long and about as wide as my finger, and the culprit, the seducer, gets a cut across the back of his neck, and he bleeds profusely. It's a deep cut, and of course some of them are proudly scarred from the fact he was awake. And they say he would bleed to death but for this grass, and I don't remember the scientific name. They call it Caña Negra. I have it in my notes. I have it. I only got it identified by Sydney. I had been trying for 12 years to get that one identified, and nobody knew it. It looks like sugar cane, and it's purple, but it isn't quite sugar cane, and it's not sweet. And it will stop bleeding. It's a hemostatic, applied locally. And it's wonderful stuff. And he says that all the men in the tribe would practically have bled to death if it hadn't been for that grass, because they always have it growing nearby. And as I was saying, the woman never gets punished. Well, she does. It does only if the other wife decides to take a hand in it. The betrayed wife, and then they have a hair pulling contest. I was lucky enough to see one. Unfortunately, I didn't have my camera out at the time, and it was back in the boat. And these two women, the women cut their hair straight across here, down here, and then long in the back, is straight and thick and very shiny and beautifully kept. And these two women had each other by the hair, and their heads were down. They looked like fighting elk, and their heads were down, and they weren't going this way. They just were pulling steadily, and they're walking around in a circle. It seemed to be a sort of ritual, and everybody was standing around, and they were all laughing, and the women were furious, and finally they broke it up. But for about 5 minutes while I was there, they were pulling. They didn't pull it out. I don't quite understand it, but it was very interesting to see and extremely funny.
Nicole, what part of the desmodium is used?
It's the whole plant. It's a weed that grows about so high.
So the above ground?
That you use root, leaf, stems, and fruit and flowers. It has these little burrs that stick to you. They say why it's called amor seco. It loves to stick to dry things. But there is the contraceptive, and I think that's a rather nice name for one.
There's a desmodium in India that contains DMT, Desmodium pucellum.
It's a very
in the
big
roots.
genus.
Yeah, it's a big genus. the hitchhiker plant in Hawaii is a weedy desmodium.
You may have it there. It may be one of them.
I know, when I think how much time I've spent trying to eradicate it, there's a certain irony.
Well, have dentists go to work on it.
Yes, right. Nicole, what do you think about the future of the Amazon?
Well, I think that if we can only get the word around there's money to be made by doing other things than cutting it down and burning it, then some of it may be saved.
So extractive foresting is the thing to make people aware of.
I think it's essential. Because as it is, well, you know the statistics as well as I do, if not better, and that one species is disappearing a day. Not necessarily a plant species, but a species of something. And these medicinals are disappearing. Did you saw about he wiggles a hand, I think they mean me. Yes?
I guess I asked this question of both of you. Is it true that the pharmaceutical companies in America are basically highly discouraged by law from being able to use plants in their products, and that's why it's difficult to get? Why is it that there's such a resistance to using, for instance, if there are plants in the Amazon that are valuable for their medicinal use, I understand it takes something like 8 years to get a new drug approved, and if it comes from a plant source, the company does not have any kind of a monopoly on it.
You can't get a patent on a plant.
So it's to no advantage of any kind of drug company.
There's not enough. Well, also, some of them are too efficient. For example, the ones for arthritis that really cure it. Who wants arthritis cured? Certainly not the pharmaceutical houses.
What was the name of that herb that cured the arthritis?
It's not a herb, it's the bark of a tree. It's a Unanopsis. I've forgotten the species. There aren't very many. It's not a big genus. But I have it. It's rubiaceae. And that's the one that is also effective, very effective for controlling diabetes. To everybody's surprise, it's not touted for that. And so now I know half a dozen people who are using it for diabetes. So I have an idea that this is like the uña de gato and tabebuya, which is the pau d'arco. Mm-hmm. They are things that, they work entirely by stimulating and restoring the immune system, the autoimmune system. I found them a tremendous help when I get any infection. There are a number of infections that are not easily treated with antibiotics. And I found that taking that and the antibiotic, neat. And they're now trying to get somebody to try it for AIDS, because that is the obvious. I think it's the obvious remedy. Huh? Well, any of those.
Tabebuya.
Pau d'arco is a tabebuya.
Right.
And that is also, in Iquitos, it's known only as a cure for diabetes. And the owner of the Johnson motor franchise for all of Peru, the outboard motors, was so helped by it that he keeps it in his desk in all stores, or in the manager's desk, to be given to anybody because he feels he's so indebted to it for what it's done for him.
You know, a lot of the pau d'arco coming out of the Amazon is now thought to be phony.
I wouldn't be at all surprised.
Since nobody up here knows what it looks like, and you're getting fancy prices for this powdered bark, They can powder up anything. So immediately, once something is discovered that's effective, then fraud becomes a possibility.
Well, look at the Sangre de Grado. Even I was fooled by one. It foamed like the proper one. They put detergent in it. They get the sap of lots of trees have sap the color of blood, of sort of old blood, dark red. And so they put a little detergent in it, because if you do this with Sangre de Grado, the marvelous healing and hemostatic agent, because it does definitely speed regeneration of healthy tissue. And then it will foam if you do that. Okay, take any old tree sap and put a little bit of any kind of detergent in it, and bingo, you got it.
There's no substitute for growing your own, because then you know what you have.
Your trees are about ready to be milked, aren't they?
Yes, we have Sangre de Grado trees in Hawaii, and we're propagating it furiously. It's a wonderful, fast-growing tree.
I know, it's a
Croton
pretty tree,
lechleri.
Do you sell seeds and cuttings from things? Is that part of what?
Yes, when we can. I mean, our collections are small, but every plant that we have, we're trying to get cuttings off of. It's tricky for a 501c3 to make a lot of profit out of its business ventures. Some of you may know Daniel and Ellen's business. Their catalogs have been around. We are wholesalers to them, as are many other companies. And we want to spread this stuff out, get it to other botanical gardens in the Hawaiian Islands and other places, because what if the volcano were to blow up and wipe out our scene? Then all this would be shot. So it is important to spread the stuff around. Most of the plants that we have not been studied at all the way they should. I mean, we have plants for impotence, baldness, kidney stones, diabetes.
What's the one for baldness?
I don't know what the Indians call it. The scientific name is scoparia. It's a scoparia.
It's a scoparia. I have some scoparias, I don't remember what for.
I think it's Scoparia dulcis.
Scoparia dulcis, yes, that is also, I have it, but it's not for, I haven't got it for heavy. As a matter of fact, I've wondered about that. The Witotas maintain that
Bixalana?
Not Bixalana, but that's a choti.
Yes.
That's Wito. You know, the black stuff that paints your skin, they used to paint their skins black.
Yeah,
will grow hair. But I have never seen a bald Indian. Bald Indians and fat Indians seem not to be genetically possible. So I'm a little dubious about the things that are supposed to keep you slim and elegant or fine and hairy. In fact, I'm very dubious about most things, and it takes forever to establish a thing well enough for me to put it in my notes, and a frightful lot of work.
Yes, some of these things you try, and you sort of realize that it lies in a domain of language and expectation, and that something you define as unpleasant, they might define as pleasant and worthwhile. For instance, they have a plant that after you've carried your backpack along the trail all day long, they say that your muscles are stiffening up. So they have this plant that's like a nettle.
Yeah, but they are nettles. It's just ordinary nettles.
Yes, they pat
and
all
they use
over.
Them.
And they urge you to do this.
All the Indians swear by it.
Why should you do this? What a terrible idea. You know?
I think so too, and they all use it. I've had my bearers, at the end of the day, always just beat themselves with nettles. And they say it feels great.
And there are also, you probably encountered this, Nicole, there is this concept of a culture-specific disease And there are a lot of these in the Amazon, and a lot are cured by ayahuasqueros. I can't remember the term. You probably know it, Nicole, but when your luck goes off.
Oh, yeah, I wrote ivory. I thought it meant I smelled bad, but it didn't. It meant I'd been having a lot of bad luck. Everything went wrong. Mal-aire.
Mal-aire, and that's a disease. You have a problem.
Oh, susto. Susto is interesting too. Susto is fear. You get sick from if you're badly startled. And babies especially are susceptible to this. Give a baby a bad scare and you'll get sick. Well, maybe. Do they do that in our civilization?
Not really. You don't
get a chill.
Huh?
Get a chill. Some people think that if you get a chill, that you'll get sick from it. Similar sort of shock, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And but they recognize a lot of psychological states as being the cause of illness. Depression, or you don't see much of that. In fact, remarkably few neuroses are notable.
Well, this is, I think, is the legacy of shamanism.
I do too.
That where shamanism is a healthy institution, neurosis is virtually unknown.
You do see an occasional psychosis.
But that could be a genetic predisposition. It
can also be through injury.
True. Yes, serious psychosis seems to arise from a different set of causes, but neurotic activity is, and people suppress.
It's very rare.
It is rare.
Well, so is psychosis. But the Chulichaka is supposed to make you nuts.
Is that the guy with the beard who comes?
No, he's the one with his feet on backwards.
Oh, yeah. They have all these demons that they fear.
Augustine says he knew a Chulichaka. He saw him quite often. I gathered with other friends. I wouldn't put it past Augustino. He's a sculptor, magnificent. He's come to live in the States. His work's superb. It's frightfully interesting.
Augustino Rivas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure there are people here who know him. He has quite a reputation.
Pat?
Yes, that was a question I was saving for this afternoon.
About what?
I understand that neuroses and psychoses have increased in the Amazon and in other parts of the world, like obsessive neuroses, anxiety, depression, and psychopathological.
Well, yes, they're getting colds in the head, too.
Are there any plant medicines that are being used in the way that we use psychoactive drugs?
Ayahuasca. That's what it is. The reason psychosis and all this is increasing is simply that stress is increasing worldwide.
And that's why just as they have got measles now and whooping cough, which are incidentally fatal there, because they don't have the immunities that we have developed. And they kill an awful lot of children unless they're vaccinated. The missionaries now, most missions, no matter what kind, vaccinate all the children they can get too, because they want to save them.
Well, we were also talking previously about the American or the Western pharmaceutical companies wanting to make profit, and yet there are outfits that, quote, are non-profit, like Direct Relief, who distribute American
I don't know any.
Like for measles, vaccinations, that sort of thing.
Oh, that sort of...
Why isn't there a non-profit organization from Western civilization that can go to these other countries and extract
Because that's not what they're for. That's not what pharmaceutical companies are for. They're out to make money, they're not out for...
Well, you see, it would be possible, you would think, for like a feminist collective to create a non-profit pharmaceutical company, concentrate on these drugs that relate to women and reproduction. This is the kind of political action that hasn't been tried yet. Everything is done old style, but I think there would be tremendous opportunities for
And I think great support.
Yeah.
And there is nothing right now.
No, botanical dimensions, which is far from that, is the closest thing. But you need, somebody who's really intensely committed to getting these contraceptives out. And as a political thing, with no motivation or very little motivation to turn a profit, then you could probably get somewhere. This abortion pill that's being developed in France, which is the pharmaceutical equivalent of one of these abortifacients, is obviously going to change the whole reproductive freedom argument. Much of the position of the right to life people just becomes irrelevant. All it means is that we're going to have one more illegal drug to worry about in this society, but one addressed not to psychoactivity, but bioactivity.
Well, Terence, the main problem is getting the plants from over there over here.
No.
No, the development, testing, and satisfying of the government.
Well, who needs that if you just have a seed catalog and you're selling seeds to people?
Who else is going to grow them?
But
Some of these things are very difficult.
And you have to be careful if you're going to interfere with the reproductive system. I mean, this is delicate stuff here. You want to know that you're not going to have a negative fallout 20 or 30 years in the future. But getting the plants is not a problem. A $50,000 investment would get all of these plants back to Southern California in a greenhouse, cataloged.
Wouldn't keep the greenhouse long, though.
No, it would take $5 million to go from there to a product on the market freely available to women. It's the development, testing, and certification that is just fiendishly difficult because these chemical companies, it's a big boys game.
Well, you know that most of the FDA people who are in big jobs, with the FDA important jobs, go on to very highly paid jobs with pharmaceutical houses.
But what I'm looking at is sort of a small industry where people are encouraged to plant their own plots.
Well, I would be afraid of that.
You'd be afraid of that?
Yes, because how do you know they get the right stuff? You'd have to be very sure of that, because some close relations are apt to be toxic.
We had an idea that is still alive. It was not clear it was for Botanical Dimensions to do, but someone could do it, of what we called the Botanical First Aid Kit. And what you would do is you would survey the entire world's known catalog of medicinal plants, and out of that you would select a plant for migraine, a plant to cause abortion, a contraceptive, a hallucinogen, an antidiuretic, an antidysenteric, say 12 plants. And then you would grow these in a huge greenhouse and build little care packages of living plants that could be then sent to third world people, and they would just grow these things in their dooryard. Most third world people have local, but if the ayahuasca is prophylactic for malaria, you distribute it in the kit throughout the world.
But isn't it supposed to be rather good for parasites too?
Oh, it's proven for parasites. The malarial thing is more speculative.
Well, that's a parasite.
But you see, you're giving people a self-renewing pharmacy in their own backyard.
Right, but even right here in the United States, there are all kinds of people who, given a few seeds or cuttings of something, would...
People, and you've got to get people getting pushy.
Hear, hear. Get pushy. We've been polite too long. I mean, the gentlemanliness of this debate about saving the world.
Is it gentlemanliness or timidity combined with laziness?
Timidity, gutlessness, cupidity, ignorance, momentum, all those good values. Well, why don't we break for lunch and come back to this at 1:30? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is a wrap-up session. I'm going to have to leave at its termination. I want to express my special deep thanks to Nicole, who has performed gallantly and above and beyond the call of duty. Well, I'm a war horse at this, my dear. I feel like I led a virgin into a dance hall, but you dance very well.
Thank you.
I would like my fantasy is to see Nicole become the Mother Teresa of rainforest salvation. We'll keep her card playing and heavy drinking off the front pages and to sell her as Mother Teresa in green. But this is serious business that we're engaged in, and it is, on one level among ourselves, it is communication and sharing and opening and building consensus. But when we turn away from our family and out toward the uncomprehending or even hostile world outside, then it becomes propaganda. It becomes a struggle for the hearts and minds of people everywhere. And I think most people are with us. It's simply that they haven't had it explained to them in such a way that they were able to realize that. In other words, we're not out to convert anybody to anything. We're out to help people discover that they agreed with this point of view all along. It has to be so because, after all, we stand for something fairly simple and unambiguous. Life, survival, continuity, caring, relationship, feeling, joy. Who's going to vote against this if it's properly explained to them? So I view these things as consciousness-raising sessions in the old style, and hope that you will see it as more than even privately inspiring entertainment, but that you will go out and get these points of view to people, get these attitudes out, not unto the greater glory of Terence McKenna or Nicole Maxwell or the Ojai Foundation, but because this needs to be said. It needs to be empowered. The first step towards solving any problem is an awareness that the problem exists. Now, we're all very tired of that because we've been suffering and agonizing over the problem of a dying earth, some of us for years. Nevertheless, the astonishing news is some folks haven't heard or have only heard recently. And it's very important not to panic them or alarm them, but to inspire them and motivate them and bring them into the project of reclaiming the earth. I mean, this is our legacy. This is our birthright. It is the legacy and birthright of our unborn children. And, you know, there maybe there is, but I don't know it. Rich as Greek is, there isn't a word for being so perverse that you devour your own children. The Manaids, the women possessed of Dionysic frenzy, what was always put against them was that they devoured their own children. This is a propaganda image that to be smeared with this is to be tainted very deeply. Well, it is literally true that we are guilty of a crime which the ancients could barely conceive. We are looting the planet for our pleasure. Our condominiums, speedboats, and electronic gadgetry is literally part of the legacy of our children. What kind of people comprise the larger society in which we are embedded that they would do a thing like that? It's a crime beyond war. War, you simply slaughter all the fools who volunteer for it and all the fools who stand around and watch. But to destroy the potential of a future for our children is a crime that boggles the mind. And this is the final stage of the dominator metaphor. When I picked up the New York Times a year ago and read that the United States State Department was advocating the spraying of aerial herbicides over the Ojai Basin to eradicate coca, to me, it felt like a turning point, comparable to the assassination of John Kennedy or Pearl Harbor. It was so clearly perverse, so clearly directed against itself. The contradictions become so odious that at a certain point, people of moral dignity feel they have no option left except to somehow throw themselves on the cogs of the machinery to try and halt it from carrying out the program of Moloch, the program of self-devourment that we have set in motion. Now, if ever there was a moment to talk to your neighbors, clarify your own thinking, support organizations that are trying to make a difference, now is the time. And we can make a difference. And I know you have heard that, and it's a cliche, and there's a tendency not to believe it. I'd been here, Botanical Dimensions was fairly narrowly focused until a couple of years ago on saving shamanic hallucinogens. Then, really through Kat's process, the need was felt to encompass this whole problem of destruction of the warm tropics. So I began writing letters to the UN and the IMF and the World Bank and all of these people, expecting to find a vast, well-funded edifice of typing pools and computer networks and people doing something. I discovered that very little is going on. We have advanced a long, long way down this path on yak alone. There is not somewhere vast organizations toiling to contact every Brazilian politician and put the twist on him, toiling to contact every American corporation that is contributing to this atrocity and threatening them with stock sell-offs, boycotts, and whatever. All the obvious things that you may think are being done, you may then dismiss by saying, well, I'm sure I shouldn't do that. Surely somewhere a staff of 50 is working on that problem. Well, when you look into it, you discover it is not happening. If any one of you has moderate or great wealth and have decided not to pitch in with saving the rainforest because you think a lot of people are working in that field already, forget it. The number of people waving their arms about it is legion. The number of people who are actually attempting to halt it is countable on the fingers of two hands. So, and every issue, I think, is like this. The gas weapons, the fight against formula over breastfeeding, all of these organizations piddle along on peanuts, absolute peanuts. If someone were to give me or the Ojai Foundation $1 million and say, do your good work, word would get out of the phenomenal generosity of this person. Imagine $1 million. Did you know that the standard issue Air Force fighter plane costs $120 million? One. And they line these things up on the runways of various airfields 120 deep. We are completely paralyzed or unable to perceive the disparity in the way the money is spent. If someone were to give, or had even the power to give, because private wealth is not like governmental wealth. If you're a private person and you control a fortune of $500 million, you are among the 1,000 richest people in the world. If you're a government with a budget of $500 million, you have your hand in everybody's pocket around the world because you're a beggar. If someone were to give to the New Age the price of one fighter plane, and half the governments in the world have dozens of these things, that $120 million would write a ticket to rebirth for every center in the state, all the movies, films, pilgrimages, conferences, conscience-raising, experimental programs of fringe scientific research, all of that would be prosecuted to a glorious end. The amazing thing is, we who have no money have all the ideas. If the cost of one fighter plane were spent on the promotion of ideas to save the world would probably advance 50% closer to its own salvation. So what is the matter with us? Why are we so perverse? What is it that drives the inertia of these dominator systems? Because we're not asking for half the military budget, not even close. And yet we're not being cut any slack at all. And it doesn't make any sense. People love to talk about the new freedom in the Soviet Union and how exhilarating it must be. My hope for the Soviet Union is that they shame us with the level of their freedom of discourse and their ability to look their past in the face and reassess where they are going. So this is not a plea for $1 million. This is a plea for consideration of the perverseness of the way we set our priorities. The world can be saved. It's simply a matter of diverting, I would say, 5% of GNP to do it. Well, only a terminally psychopathic person would refuse to divert 5% of their energy flow toward their own salvation. If we can't get our act together to do that, I think the calm and cool judgment of Gaia Almighty is, who needed such clowns? I'll hang out with the octopi, the dolphins, the butterflies, and the termite nests. I don't need this headache. I don't need acid rain. I don't need strontium in the environment. I don't need extraction of petroleum products and tons of junk in orbit in order to foster what? Shakespeare? There hasn't been a Shakespeare for 500 years. These clowns aren't producing anything. H-bombs don't make it in the Gaian scale of values. So the point here is tremendously perverse misdirection of resources, a tremendous patience with institutions that have proven that they are either ineffective or actually the enemy. Institutions like the Brazilian government, large pharmaceutical companies, capitalism, so forth and so on. Why are we so patient when our world, our children's world, the world of all future life on Earth hangs in the balance? I think that the time is really coming when people are going to have to stand up and be counted. And I hope when you will leave here this afternoon that you will feel that our group experience has given you permission to come out of the environmental closet, the psychedelic closet, the caring for the fate of the human family closet, because all of these things are either dismissed as perverse, dangerous, or airheaded. And obviously, they are not. This is the most serious business that we could be about. This is what we were born to do. It must be, because if this is not what we were born to do, then what we were born to do is witness the death of the only living world we know. And I, for one, am not ready to stand mute witness to that kind of an atrocity. Do you want to add anything, Nicole? And then we'll take more questions. Anybody out here? We'll take questions now till around 3 o'clock. Daniel.
What's happening currently with research on some of the plants that your Nicole has been trying to save? I know you say not much, but are you getting any interest from natural products people or anything?
Well, yes. I mean, we're sort of in a bind, a time bind. We now have many of these medically interesting or potentially medically interesting plants growing, but they're not yet large enough that we can make bulk biomass harvest for research. In the next 2 or 3 years, we hope to be able to do this. We are growing Castanospermum australis, which is a plant with a potential impact on inhibiting the AIDS virus. And we're beginning to supply a lab with that. Hopefully, Sangre de Grado will come on.
The tababuya?
Tababuya. We're growing that, and we're hoping to create a scheme. We have that, the
Uncaria. Those are terribly important. I have seen them work. I have seen a man who was sent to Lima with cancer in terminal, with just no prognosis at all. I went over his medical records, and he had 10% cancer cells in the bloodstream at the time. They came to him in the hospital and said, the doctor said, "It's awfully sorry, but you've got to leave because we're going on strike tomorrow." And so it was the biggest break he ever had. Some friends came to take him home, and the doctors told him he's got about 9 days left. He's dying now. They took him home, and they started him on this uña de gato and a few other things. The other things were he had a cystitis and generalized septicemia as well. And in 2 weeks he was walking around. The strike lasted 31 days, and the doctors were absolutely floored. They didn't believe he was the same person. When I met him, he was back at his original job. He was 54 years old, I think, or 58, which was teaching ballet and flamenco. And flamenco, I have done a lot of dance, and flamenco is the most exhausting thing I have ever attempted. And I've known him now for 10 years or so, and he's still fine. I took the director of the Ciba-Geigy Cancer Ontology Investigation Laboratories. He came over from Basel to visit his daughter, who's a friend of mine in Peru. And I took him to see him. He flipped. He said, "You've got to get me some of that stuff." after he examined the man, said he had one small node, totally inactive, on a bone, on one rib bone. He said, "You've got to get me some of that." I did. I knew where to buy it in Lima, and bought him a good quantity. And he took it with him. He said, "I've got to start research on this immediately." Then he had the nerve to write me and say, "You must never tell anybody about this." Oh. They hadn't even paid me for what I put out for the stuff I bought them. And I didn't ask them to. And I haven't heard from him since. And that is what I consider one well-established case with proper evidence. It is one of many I have run into who have told me about it, but I have not personally read their medical records from a cancer institute. And with things like that, are we going to let this all be destroyed? Are we going to just say, "Well, you know, that was one case," and of course it isn't one case, there are many. Aren't we going to insist on some real investigation in a public way so that everybody knows what happens, and the results are not kept privately for one organization? That's murdering people. Because to keep that information secret, I think, would be a sort of mass murder.
Yes. Yeah.
A lot of your stories, Nicole, have involved part of the players in the story have involved an encounter with a physician similar to the one you just told.
Yes.
And many of the stories make the physicians look muddle-headed.
No, not necessarily. They are muddle-headed. What physicians?
Perhaps that's the answer to my question.
It's not the physicians.
The question is, are there physicians in or around the jungle that are allies of your point of view?
There are a few. There are more and more coming in to do research on it. Not so much in this country. Germany. I have just been over there at the invitation of an institute that was founded by the wife of the president, he was president until 1984. And she is an MD. They have now 44,000 members. They are testing things like that. In Germany, you can buy all these things, you see. They're offered to the general public, and physicians supervise their use in many cases. Why can't we? Why does it have to be kept secret?
What's your notion? What's the answer? Why is it being...
The answer is to get people saying, "That stuff's there, we want to see it researched." Why isn't somebody doing some clinical investigation?
And you say European...
You're in Rome. Dr. I have his name written down somewhere. I brought with me his name. There's a man at the University of Rome who's working on this, and he's doing some very interesting work. I think it was he that established the low toxicity of Uña de Gato, and which was he found it to achieve any semblance of a toxic effect, they had to give more than 1 gram per kilo body weight of concentrated extract. That's kind of a high dose. And but this country, no.
A good example or a good case that shows how all this works is the AIDS problem, which as soon as it was identified and they knew what they had on their hands, they took 2 directions. Some of these big pharmaceutical companies, it's called rational drug design, where you know what you want this molecule to do, and you design it. What I understand by jihad is he's saying people who don't agree with us can convert or go under the sword. I haven't reached the end of my rope to that degree yet, but I do think politics as usual, even revolutionary politics as usual, is not enough. There has to be an almost religious intensity to this. I think we'd have a religious intensity if we were personally struggling to save ourselves from drowning or to escape from a burning building. And we are drowning, and we are in a burning building. So I think we need to rise to that level of adrenal focus and single-minded intensity. And to my mind, what this means downstream, not now, but downstream, is a psychedelic religious option. I mean, I hate the word church. It will not pass my lips in an affirmative mode. But a psychedelic community where the periphery is political interaction with the rest of society, but the centerpiece has to be the boundary dissolving sense of communal collectivity and common caring that typified tribal peoples in the archaic time. There's no other way out. Maybe this way won't work. It won't work unless we try it. But I don't see anybody with an alternative plan. Most plans to solve some problem are directed at some fairly short-term problem. But I think we need to think about the next 500 years, and in a slightly less intense mode, the next 1,000 years. I mean, what are we to make of ourselves? Whither mankind? Are we to be ultimately viewed as a cosmic accident, the perils of unfocused intelligence? Or can we reflect the inner dream, the inner image of wholeness that inspires us and makes us more than animals and raises us up as a simulacrum of the goddess? That's what I would hope for. And thought, cognition, planning, caring, emotion, communication, intentionality, focus, and authenticity are the domains that we have to be in order to carry this off. You wanted challenge? Some of you have made fortunes. That was no challenge. You wanted a challenge? Save the planet. There's a challenge. That's what everybody who came before did. They participated sufficiently at least to pass the buck to us. Can we participate sufficiently to pass the buck to our grandchildren? Or are we just going to go down as the lamest generation in the life of the planet? I can't believe it. I know too many of these people. I love too many of these people. We just need to do our best. As the Grateful Dead say, just a little bit harder, just a little bit more. You can't go back, and you can't stand still. If the thunder don't get you, then the lightning will. So, forward into the future with a high heart and reasonable hope that we can make this planet into a living reflection of the inner dream. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you, Nicole, very, very much.
Well, I'm peculiarly useless in this sort of discussion because I have not been in this country enough to know whom I want to shoot.
I'll point the gun. You pull the trigger.
I don't know the tactics nor the people to approach. That hasn't been my business. I'm a retriever.
Well, and you're a wonderful icon. God forbid that any of us should ever be nothing more than an icon, but it's a throwaway.
That but that implies a totally motionless object.
An icon. Well, you pose as an icon. It's just a part-time job.